Okay, so today we're going deep on something a lot of you have been asking about, modern dating.
Yeah, it seems like it's on everyone's minds these days.
Absolutely, and we got a really fascinating set of sources from you guys, and we're going to try to make sense of it all. So we have a YouTube video, which is a firsthand account of someone who describes himself as an average guy and his 3-month journey on dating apps.
Right, getting into the trenches.
Exactly, and then we have a Digital Edge article, which asks the question, can algorithms really find love?
A big question.
A huge question, right?
Right.
And then finally, a Time Ideas piece, which explores how algorithms and racial bias kind of intersect in the whole world of online dating.
Yeah, shaping the whole landscape in ways we might not even be aware of.
For sure. So let's start with that YouTube video. It's called 3 Months on Dating Apps as an Average Guy.
Hmm.
What I learned by Derek
Uh-huh.
Silver, and right away what jumps out is this feeling that he's in this incredibly competitive environment.
Yeah, I can feel like a whole different world out there.
Totally. And he really talks about how, as an average guy, he felt like he was just facing this tidal wave of attention that women on these platforms receive.
They can create a real sense of imbalance.
Right. And it kind of pushes people into behaving in ways that they might not otherwise.
I can see that trying to stand out in a crowded space.
Yeah, and that really shaped how he approached the whole thing.
Yeah.
He felt like he had to play a game, quote unquote, like being himself and just trying to connect with one person at a time felt like he was going to get him nowhere.
Ah, so he felt the need to adopt a strategy.
Exactly. And he talks about this push and pull thing in attraction.
Yeah.
This idea that being the nice guy who invests early on might actually put you in a disadvantage.
Interesting. So it's almost like a counterintuitive approach.
Yeah, you felt like you had to move quickly,
Yeah.
get the number set up, the date. But then again, isn't there always a bit of a performance in dating, even offline?
That's true. We're always presenting a certain version of ourselves.
So is online dating just making that more explicit?
Perhaps it accelerates that process, compressing the time frame for making an impression.
And then he does this experiment, which is really telling. So he and a friend create this fake profile of an attractive Asian girl, like a 7.75 or an 8 out of 10.
Okay, setting up a controlled experiment.
Right. And within just 24 hours, this fake profile gets like 400 likes from guys that he calls top tier, like the guys who are probably getting a lot of attention themselves.
Wow, that's a stark contrast.
Huge.
Yeah.
And he compares that to his own experience. Most guys get a handful of likes, maybe 1 or 2 a week.
There's a real disparity there.
It's striking. And so he tries to unpack what's going on there.
Yeah.
Is it all about perceived attractiveness, or are there other dynamics at play, like how men and women approach initiating contact?
Right. Are women simply less likely to send out those initial likes?
And his take is pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
He says women don't need to send likes because they're flooded with options, and that traditional gender roles, men being the initiators, are still very much in effect.
It's interesting how those traditional patterns might be playing out in this new digital space.
He also talks about this idea that all this attention might give some women what he calls an inflated sense of ego. And he shares some pretty out there examples from dating profiles.
Mhm.
Things like dating me is like breathing for the first time,
Okay, that's a bit much.
right? Or don't go out with me if you can't handle perfection.
So a bit of hyperbole there.
Yeah. But could it also be that these are just ways to stand out, in this incredibly crowded space?
It's possible maybe a way to grab attention and signal something unique about themselves.
Right, because otherwise you just get lost in the noise.
And maybe some humor mixed in there too.
He then uses this analogy of blueberry jam, which I thought was really interesting. So imagine 2 stores, right? One has 2 brands of blueberry jam, the other has 200.
Okay, I'm following.
In the first store, you just grab a jar and go,
Right.
go, go.
Yeah.
Right. But in the second, you're scrutinizing every detail, comparing every label.
They're going to be there a while.
Exactly. And his argument is that the abundance of choice for women online leads to this increased pickiness. And they're scrutinizing even the tiniest things about guys, like their height.
So the paradox of choice in action.
Right. And he brings up specific examples of height preferences. And he even mentions this really eyebrow-raising phrase, colonize me, related to white men over 6 feet.
Wow, so very specific criteria.
And what I found really interesting is that he then connects this to much broader societal issues. He talks about passport bros, the rise of OnlyFans and pornography, male loneliness, suicide rates, declining marriage and relationship rates, and even rising male virginity.
That's a pretty bleak picture.
It is, right?
Oh.
And it's a bold connection to make. But it does raise questions about the potential links between the challenges of modern dating, particularly for men, and these broader societal trends.
For sure, it's something to consider.
Okay, so let's shift gears now and look at that Digital Edge article. Can the process of finding a romantic partner be taken over by an algorithm? So we've talked about these personal experiences. Now let's get into the tech itself, the algorithms behind these apps.
Right, going under the hood.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the article kind of lays out the different approaches. Some platforms use detailed questionnaires. Others are more visually driven using swipes. And they're constantly learning from user behavior through machine learning.
So a variety of strategies at play.
And they all have their own proprietary algorithms, these desirability rankings based on swipes. And it's this ongoing process of refinement.
The algorithms are always evolving.
And the experts they interviewed seem to agree that algorithms can be useful for that initial screening process, helping to identify potential compatibility based on preferences, personality traits, which in theory could save people some time.
Makes sense streamlining the early stages.
But they all emphasize the limitations. Algorithms just can't capture those really crucial human elements like physical attraction, that spark of chemistry.
Right, the algorithm can't predict if you'll have that instant connection.
And then there are things like readiness for commitment, nonverbal cues, body language, the whole unpredictable nature of relationships, which are influenced by so many real-life factors.
Right, finances, career, changes, family dynamics, it's all part of the equation.
And there's a great quote from Fabian Fu. He's the founder of matchmaking, and he says relationships are all about hard work. And compatibility, as measured by an algorithm, is just one piece of the puzzle.
A very important point, compatibility doesn't guarantee a successful relationship.
Exactly. And he also says that even when there's a strong match on paper, things can still fall apart because of communication issues or just life getting in the way.
It's about so much more than just ticking boxes on a questionnaire.
Dr. Rashid Amini, the creator of Nanaya, brings up another really important point. He emphasizes the role of chemistry in the early stages of dating. But he also points out a problem for algorithms. People often don't even know what they want in a partner, or they're not totally honest with themselves about their preferences.
Right, so if the input is flawed, the output will be too.
Exactly. And if that's the case, how can an algorithm possibly deliver accurate matches?
It's a fundamental challenge.
He says that Nanaya actually focuses on helping users understand themselves better, fostering self-awareness so they can have better dating experiences.
Interesting. So it's about equipping users with the tools for better decision-making.
And he's pretty critical of those photocentric apps. He argues that they're mainly measuring attraction based on looks and those superficial interactions like swipes.
Makes sense. They're prioritizing the visual element.
And he even compares them to social media algorithms and their potential for psychological manipulation to keep users hooked.
Right, keeping you swiping for that next hit of dopamine.
M. Nasri Mudd from MyFinB makes a similar point. He says, predicting compatibility requires deep analysis of someone's behavior, attitudes, personality over time.
It's a complex picture.
And he raises some really interesting questions. Can AI really understand human emotions, reactions, all those factors that shape how we feel and behave in relationships?
Right. Can we really reduce something as complex as love to an algorithm?
And his conclusion is that AI in dating should be used to help us understand ourselves and others better, not to dictate who we should love.
I like that it's about empowering users, not replacing human judgment.
Fabian Fu comes back into the conversation with this idea that there are no good or bad algorithms. It's more about finding a platform whose logic aligns with your personal beliefs about what makes a good match.
So choosing a platform that resonates with your values.
Right. Whether it's based on personality types like Myers-Briggs or love languages, whatever framework you use.
Finding a system that speaks your language.
He talks about his own experience with what he calls dating app fatigue. Just feeling exhausted by the superficiality of it all.
It can definitely feel shallow at times.
And that's what pushed him to create matchmaking. He wanted a platform that encouraged deeper engagement by asking those tougher questions up front.
Like deal breakers.
Exactly, like do you want kids, that kind of thing. And Matchmaking even provides a report card based on shared values and preferences, so you can potentially avoid wasting time or getting hurt.
Getting those big questions out of the way early on.
He gives this example of, imagine dating someone for 2 years and then finding out you have completely different views on having children.
Heartbreaking.
Devastating. And he explains that Matchmaking uses things like MBTI and love language tests. They even get advice from real-life matchmakers, and they focus on matching complementary personalities, not just shared interests.
So going beyond those superficial commonalities.
And he says their algorithm is constantly evolving based on feedback people provide after dates.
So it's learning and adapting over time.
Then we have Violet Lim. She's the CEO of Lunch, actually, which is a more traditional matchmaking service. They use human dating consultants and in-depth questionnaires and interviews.
So the human touch is central to their approach.
She uses this great analogy. She says that her consultants are like nutritionists, not just waiters.
Interesting. So they're not just taking orders?
Right? They're actively guiding clients based on this deep understanding. And they can spot potential blind spots or needs that an algorithm might miss.
They're looking at the whole picture.
She tells this story about a client who really valued sunrise as a symbol of simplicity, and her understanding of that detail helped her find him a perfect match.
That's a beautiful example of how human intuition can play a role.
She also talks about this illusion of choice, that online dating creates this feeling that there's always something better out there, which makes it hard to commit.
You're constantly swiping, looking for the next best thing.
She even calls it elevator dating, always going up and down, never really stopping.
So you never give anyone a real chance.
Her service tries to counteract that by slowing things down, curating matches, managing expectations, emphasizing the effort that goes into each pairing so people take it seriously.
So it's about intentionality and focus.
She also points out that online dating might actually be narrowing our choices because we're dismissing people based solely on a photo.
Right, judging a book by its cover.
And we might be missing out on connections that would have flourished in a different context. She even says her own husband probably would have swiped left on her if they'd met on an app.
Wow, that's a powerful example.
So lunch actually holds back photos. And initially they focus on voice and the consultant's judgment.
Shifting the focus away from just the visual.
And what's interesting is that even though they have this more traditional model, they're also incorporating technology, developing AI solutions for their consultants and apps for client communication.
So it's not technology versus human, it's finding the right balance.
Right, the best of both worlds. Okay, last but not least, let's get to that Time Ideas article, When Love and the Algorithm Don't Mix. This one brings a really critical lens to the whole issue of algorithms and dating.
Yeah, examining the potential downsides.
The author, April Williams, shares this personal story about her white husband constantly being shown profiles of blonde women on Tinder, even though he never said he preferred blondes.
So the algorithm making assumptions.
And the irony is that she's a black woman, but she had blonde hair when they met. So it's kind of a funny twist.
A bit of algorithmic serendipity.
And she goes on to explore the experiences of people of color in online dating, the issues of exoticism, the feeling of being the least desired demographic.
Those are really important issues.
She even asks this question, how do algorithms reconcile blackness?
A really profound question.
And she mentions a study from the University of Michigan where researchers found that people of color often suspect that algorithms are a major reason for their negative experiences with online dating.
So there's a real sense of distrust in the technology.
And she talks about this historical context, the long history of favoring physical similarity in relationships, the laws against interracial marriage, this whole idea of racial purity.
Right, those deeply ingrained biases.
And then she brings up these patents from Match Group, which suggests that their algorithms actually select matches based on things like hair color, eye color, ethnicity.
Wow, so reinforcing those biases.
And one of the patents even says they match people with similar and/or compatible character traits and values, and they use signals like height, weight, age, location, income, and ethnicity.
So those physical traits are being used as proxies for deeper compatibility.
Her argument is that the online dating industry is basically an extension of traditional matchmaking with all its cultural baggage.
So those historical patterns are being replicated in the digital realm.
And she talks about how this concept of type, who we find attractive, is so deeply shaped by cultural beliefs about race.
Right, those societal messages about who is desirable.
She says there's this kind of secret language around racial preferences, and she uses examples like, conservatives tend to prefer a certain look.
So our preferences are not formed in a vacuum.
And her point is that by focusing on superficial similarity, we're missing out on opportunities to connect with people based on shared values.
Right, maybe you both care deeply about climate change or pandemic safety, but the algorithm never gets you there.
She even says that the dating industry might be reflecting this broader phenomenon of sexual racism, these racialized reasons for choosing a partner.
It's a very provocative term.
And she draws parallels to other areas of technology where algorithms are perpetuating societal inequities, things like language models, recidivism algorithms, healthcare algorithms.
It's a pervasive issue.
She talks about this historical investment in promoting relationships of racial sameness.
Right, a long history of trying to keep people separate.
And her point is that the behaviors we establish on dating apps, around things like dating, income, gender roles, they can actually influence broader societal norms.
It's a two-way street.
She says a lot of people are looking for connections that go beyond race, body type, upbringing. They're looking for those deeper bonds. But the algorithms and the whole dating culture are making that really difficult.
So the technology is not necessarily aligned with those desires.
And her argument is that dating companies need to design for a more diverse user base, not just those who are looking for superficial similarities.
Designing for a wider range of needs and preferences.
Because ultimately, that would benefit everyone and would benefit our culture as a whole.
Creating a more inclusive dating landscape.
She also points out that our own swiping behavior is feeding back into these algorithms, reinforcing those existing frameworks of desirability.
So we're part of the problem.
And her conclusion is that if we really want to change these racially biased algorithms, we need to confront our own prejudices, our own racially coded ways of evaluating people, and be open to connections that go beyond those superficial preferences.
So it's a call for both individual and systemic change.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the world of modern dating, we've heard a lot of different perspectives. So the YouTube creator's sense of competition, the need to play the game.
Right, those strategic approaches to dating.
The Digital Edge article's exploration of algorithms, their potential and their limitations.
Can they really find us love, or are they just tools?
And then the Time piece, with its focus on the intersection of algorithms and race and those really critical questions about bias and equity.
It's a really multifaceted issue.
You, our listener, wanted to understand all this quickly and thoroughly, and I hope this deep dive has done just that.
We tried to pack in as much as we could.
Bringing those surprising insights to light.
Exactly, those things that make you go,
So let's leave you with this final thought. If dating app algorithms are designed based on existing societal preferences and biases, how much are they actually reinforcing the limitations we're trying to overcome?
Right. Are we shaping the algorithms, or are they shaping us?
Are we just perpetuating the same patterns in this digital space? Something to think about as you navigate the world of modern dating?
Absolutely food for thought.
Thanks for joining us.
Until next time.
Bye.